My sister secretly took over my father's estate while I was grieving. I thought it was grief confusion, until I found a hidden bank account in my name that she'd been stealing from for years. That's when I knew she'd planned this from the beginning. When my dad passed away, it felt like someone had yanked the ground out from under me. I was always the daddy's girl in the family, not in a spoiled way, but in that quiet bond kind of way. He'd call me every Sunday just to hear about my week, and he was the only person who remembered my cat's name from high school. My sister Rachel was always different. Older than me by 5 years, successful in that cold, calculated way. Law degree, no kids, high-rise apartment downtown. She didn't cry at the funeral. She just stood there, stone-faced, directing people like a wedding planner. At the time, I thought, well, maybe this is just how she grieves. After the funeral, she insisted we let her handle the paperwork. I was emotionally exhausted, still waking up at 3 a.m. thinking I'd heard Dad in the kitchen making tea. So I said okay. I trusted her. She was my sister. And she was a lawyer. Who better to make sure Dad's wishes were carried out properly? The will was supposed to be simple. Dad had told me countless times over lunch. The house would go to both of us, split, 50-50ths. Same with the savings. He'd made it clear he didn't want us fighting over anything. But weeks went by, and I didn't hear anything. No calls, no documents. When I asked Rachel, she'd say things like, "These things take time," or "Trust me, it's all under control." And stupidly, I did. Until I got a letter from the bank addressed to me, but sent to her house. She must have accidentally forwarded it. Inside was a notice about recent withdrawals from a shared estate account. My name was on the account, and apparently $42,000 had been withdrawn over the past month. I stared at that number for a long time. My rent was due. I was barely scraping by. And my sister, the person I'd trusted to honor our father, had been draining money from an account I didn't even know existed. I didn't call her right away. Instead, I dug. I went to the bank, showed my ID, and got full access to the transaction history. She hadn't just made one withdrawal. She'd been funneling money out weekly, labeling them as legal services, administration fees, and once, I'm not joking, grief management. I finally confronted her one night over the phone. I was shaking. I didn't even bother being polite. "Why are you taking money from Dad's estate without telling me?" I said. She paused for a beat, then replied coldly, "I'm managing the estate. You don't understand what that involves." $42,000? I shot back. "You think Dad would have wanted that?" Her voice didn't even waver. "You were a mess, Claire. You couldn't handle it. I had to take over." That's when something broke inside me. Not because she'd stolen from me, but because she'd weaponized my grief to do it. Like she'd planned for me to fall apart, just so she could quietly take everything.
I didn't sleep that night.
I just sat on the floor with all the documents spread out around me, trying to trace everything Rachel had done. I found emails between her and the estate attorney, emails she never CC'd me on. I found forged authorizations, where my digital signature had been conveniently used to approve transfers. I even found a quiet little clause she had added to the will after Dad died, claiming it was a correction. I called the attorney the next morning, pretending to be confused. "Can you just walk me through the timeline again?" I asked sweetly. He hesitated, said he'd have to call me back. 2 hours later, Rachel was banging on my door. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, stepping into my apartment like she owned it. "You're going to ruin everything." I didn't flinch. I handed her a folder. Inside were printed statements, email transcripts, and a timeline of every shady move she made. "You already did," I said quietly. Her eyes scanned the papers. For the first time in weeks, she looked nervous. "You think this is enough to do anything?" I tilted my head. "I don't know, but I've got a meeting with a forensic accountant tomorrow. And if that doesn't work, I'll go to the police." She tried to laugh it off, but I could see it. The crack in her armor. "You're being dramatic." "Maybe," I said. "But dramatic people go viral real fast." That shut her up. She left in a hurry, slamming the door behind her. I stood there shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. For the first time since Dad died, I felt awake. The next few days were chaos. I met with a lawyer of my own. Turns out, what Rachel did wasn't just immoral, it was illegal. Forging signatures, misappropriating funds, altering a will after death, textbook fraud. We filed a motion to freeze the estate assets. And just like that, her bank access was gone. She called me the next night, crying.
Crying.
She hadn't cried at the funeral, but now that her money faucet was off, the tears came easily. "Please don't do this," she sobbed. "This will ruin my career." I stayed quiet for a moment. Then I said, "You didn't care when you were ruining my life." She went silent. I think that was the first time Rachel realized I wasn't bluffing. She always thought I was the soft one, the quiet little sister who cried when people yelled and avoided conflict at all costs. But grief changes people. It had hardened me, sharpened me, and now I had nothing left to lose. A week passed. Then, too. The court moved fast once my lawyer presented the evidence. The judge approved a temporary injunction. All transactions involving the estate were to be halted pending further investigation. Rachel tried to file an emergency appeal. It was denied. Then came the subpoenas. Rachel's firm, the one she bragged about for years, was notified. I didn't even have to go public. The legal trail spoke for itself. I heard through a mutual friend that her boss called her into a meeting and walked out 10 minutes later looking like he'd swallowed a lemon. She wasn't fired.
Yet.
But she was suspended pending review. Suddenly, she stopped calling. No more texts, no more fake apologies. Just silence. I moved back into Dad's house. It felt weird at first, like walking through a museum. Everything was just how he left it. The old records, the photographs, the mug with #OneDad that I gave him when I was 9. I spent days cleaning, organizing, getting rid of the mold Rachel left behind, both literal and emotional. I found the journals Dad used to keep. The ones Rachel said were just full of scribbles. They weren't. They were full of letters to me. "If you're reading this," one entry said, "it means I'm gone, and you're probably hurting. But know this, I trusted you more than anyone. I know you'll do the right thing." I cried so hard I couldn't breathe. I decided to honor Dad's words by finishing what he started, protecting the legacy he left behind, and making sure the truth saw daylight. So I compiled everything. The altered documents, the court filings, screenshots of Rachel's messages, and most importantly, Dad's handwritten journals. Then I sent an anonymous email to a local investigative reporter who had covered estate fraud cases before. Within a week, the story was live. The headline hit hard. "Grieving daughter uncovers sibling's secret scheme to steal inheritance and fights back." It went viral. People started messaging me. Strangers who had gone through the same thing. Lawyers offering to help. Even Rachel's old college roommate commented under the article, "I always knew something was off with her." Rachel, predictably, lost it. She called me one last time, voice shaking, half threatening, half pleading. "Do you know what you've done to me?" "I just made sure everyone sees you for who you are," I said. "And I'm not done." Because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about rebuilding. Healing. I set up a scholarship in Dad's name for underprivileged kids who wanted to go into engineering like he did. I used the portion of the estate the court unfroze after Rachel withdrew her claim. I sent the first acceptance letter myself. The day the student replied with a thank you video, standing in front of the same university Dad once attended, I felt something shift inside me. A quiet peace. A sense of purpose. As for Rachel, last I heard, she'd moved states. Changed firms. Laid low. But her name, it was still searchable. Still tied to the article. And I was okay with that. Because in the end, I didn't need to destroy her. She did that all on her own. I just held up the mirror. A few months later, something strange happened. I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, a physical letter, handwritten, with no return address. At first, I thought it might be some thank you note from the scholarship fund, but the handwriting stopped me cold. It was Rachel's. "I know you think you've won," it began, "but you don't know everything." I stared at the page for a long time before continuing. The letter wasn't apologetic. It wasn't a confession. It was a warning. She claimed that Dad wasn't the man I thought he was, that he had a second account, a hidden property in his name, one that never showed up in the legal documents or the will. She included coordinates, even a key. "Go see for yourself," she ended it. "Then you'll understand why I did what I did." I debated throwing it away. She had manipulated me before. but curiosity, or maybe something deeper, got the better of me. The next weekend, I drove out to the location. It was 3 hours away, in a wooded area past a long dirt road. And then I saw it. A small, weathered cabin. Padlocked. Completely untouched by time. I used the key. The door creaked open. Inside were boxes. Blueprints. Letters addressed to names I didn't recognize. Photos of a woman who wasn't my mother, and a child that looked just like me. I dropped to my knees. What was this? A secret family? Or something else entirely? I picked up one letter, trembling, and began to read. The letter was dated nearly 20 years ago. It was written in my father's handwriting, unmistakable, neat, and always slightly slanted to the right. To Lucas, it began. I froze. Lucas. My name. But the contents quickly made it clear this letter wasn't meant for me. If you ever find this place, then the truth is already unraveling. I tried to keep my promises. To both families. I know what I did was wrong, loving 2 women and building 2 lives, but I never planned for it to last this long. It just did. And by the time I was ready to end one life and be honest, it was too late. People would have been destroyed. I dropped the page. 2 families. I stumbled backward and looked around the cabin again. Photos on the mantel. There he was, Dad, holding a baby. Not me. The woman beside him, smiling, was not my mom. Rachel was telling the truth. Maybe not the whole truth, and maybe not for the right reasons, but still. I had a half-brother. My world tilted. Everything I thought about my father, my family, my past, it all cracked in that instant. And Rachel knew. Somehow she knew. I sat in that cabin for over an hour, reading every letter, flipping through photos, staring at documents, rental contracts, birthday cards, even receipts. It wasn't just an affair.
It was a full second life.
And I had never suspected. Suddenly, Rachel's rage made sense. The money in the will, the split, the confusion. She must have discovered all this after Dad died. Maybe even before. Maybe Dad had started cutting ties with the second family and planning to go all in with us, and Rachel felt like her mother had been discarded. And now, she'd made sure I'd feel it too. I drove back in a daze. I didn't even remember the road, just the humming sound of tires on pavement and the word, why, bouncing around in my head like a trapped fly. Why hadn't he told us? Why did he choose to live like this? And, worst of all, why leave Rachel and me to tear each other apart instead of facing the truth? When I got home, Mom was waiting. She must have seen my face, because she didn't even ask where I'd been. She just whispered, "You found it, didn't you?"
I ser det her.
You knew. She sat down slowly, as if the weight of the years had finally caught up with her. I found out 5 years before he died. I confronted him. He begged me not to tell you. He said he'd fix it. He said he'd make it right. By lying in the will? By pretending none of it mattered. She shook her head, tears in her eyes. He was going to change the will. He started talking about dissolving the trust, selling the cabin, giving everything equally. But then he got sick, and he died before anything was signed. I leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. So, Rachel, she found the cabin before I did. Yes. And instead of coming to me, she turned it into a punishment. Mom didn't respond. She didn't need to. Now, everything made sense. Rachel's coldness, her manipulation, the calculated way she tried to make me question everything. She wasn't just grieving, she was furious. She'd spent her whole life in the shadows of a lie, and now, in her own way, she was dragging me into the dark too. But I wasn't going to stay there. I called Rachel the next morning. She didn't answer, of course, but I left a message. My voice was calm. Too calm, even to my own ears. I know everything now. The cabin, Dad, the will, all of it. You had every reason to be angry, but so did I. We were both lied to. But I'm not going to let you twist that pain into control. If you want a war, you'll get one. But if you want truth, I'll meet you halfway. I hung up. Then I called a lawyer. The cabin may have been in her name now, but the surrounding land? It was in a separate trust. One Dad had updated. Turns out he started the process of splitting ownership between us, but didn't get to finalize the structure. The trust administrator agreed to reopen the case, and just like that, Rachel didn't have the total control she thought she had. Suddenly, my calls were getting returned. She showed up at my house 2 days later, standing on the porch with a box in her arms. For a second, she looked like a little girl again, scared, angry, but too proud to cry. "I listened to your message," she said. I nodded. "Yeah." She handed me the box. "It's Dad's letters. All the ones he wrote to her. And a few to us. He just never sent them." I opened the lid slowly. Handwriting, yellowed pages, some barely legible. We stood in silence. Neither of us was ready to forgive. But we were both finally ready to listen. I spent the next few weeks reading every letter. Dad hadn't been perfect, far from it. But he had tried. He'd written about how torn he felt, about how he wished he could fix the damage between us, about how he wanted to tell the truth, but never found the courage. In the last envelope, tucked behind a photo of us as kids, was a single line in his familiar shaky script. "Don't let pain be the thing that keeps you together." I didn't call Rachel again. I didn't need to. I sold my share of the land to a conservation group. The cabin would stay, but the surrounding forest would never be developed. I left a copy of the deed in her mailbox, with a note. "We break the cycle now. For good." Then I packed a single suitcase, booked a one-way flight, and left the town and the ghosts behind me. Because sometimes the quietest revenge isn't destruction, it's freedom.